Every year, regulators issue enforcement actions against banks, not because of external hackers, not because of some sophisticated ransomware group, but because their own employees were the threat. The OCC, FDIC, and state regulators have all cited failures in insider risk monitoring in consent orders over the past 3 years. And in case after case, the warning signs were there for months. The logs existed. The data was sitting right there. Nobody was watching. Let me break down why this keeps happening and why your bank is probably exposed right now. I am Sahil Kataria, founder of FluxForce AI. Financial risk decoded. Let's start with why this problem is getting worse, not better. Over the last 5 years, every financial institution in the country has gone through some version of digital transformation. Cloud migration, new core banking platforms, API integrations, mobile-first everything. And with all of that comes one inevitable consequence. More employees with direct access to more systems, more data, more customer information than at any point in banking history. Think about who has access at your institution right now. Your tellers, digital access to customer accounts. Your loan officers, access to credit files, income documentation, social security numbers. Your IT admins, access to everything. Your customer service reps, access to account details, transaction histories, personal data. Now layer on remote and hybrid work. Before 2020, if a loan officer was downloading unusual volumes of customer data, someone might notice. They're sitting 10 feet from their manager. There's a physical environment of oversight. Today, that loan officer is working from their kitchen table. Nobody sees what they're doing on their screen at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. And then there's the cloud. Data used to live behind physical walls, servers in the basement, tapes in the vault. Now it lives in cloud environments that are accessible from anywhere by anyone with the right credentials. Moving data out of the building used to require a USB drive and a security checkpoint. Today, it requires a browser and an internet connection. Here's the stat that should keep every risk leader up at night. According to the Verizon Data Breach Investigations report, 60% of data breaches in financial services involve an insider. Not an external hacker, not a nation-state actor, an insider. Someone with a badge and a login. 60%. And that number has been trending upward year over year as the attack surface expands. More access, more systems, more remote work, more cloud. More opportunity for insider threats to go undetected. So if insiders are responsible for 60% of breaches in financial services, why aren't banks catching them? The answer is painfully simple. Every security tool in your stack was designed to stop someone from breaking in. Firewalls, endpoint detection, intrusion prevention systems, network monitoring, all of it. Built to stop external attackers. But here's the thing about insiders. They don't need to break in. They're already in. They already have credentials. They already have access. They've already passed the background check and signed the acceptable use policy. From a security tooling perspective, they look exactly like a legitimate user because they are a legitimate user. Your firewall doesn't stop an employee from downloading 10,000 customer records. Why would it? That employee is authenticated. They're on the network. They're using an approved device. The firewall's job is to keep unauthorized users out, and this person is authorized. Now, some banks have DLP, data loss prevention tools, and in theory, DLP should catch this. It's supposed to flag when sensitive data leaves the environment. When someone emails a file full of social security numbers or uploads customer records to a personal cloud drive. In practice, DLP tools at most banks are drowning in false positives. They generate so many alerts on normal business activity that the security team has either tuned the rules so loose that real exfiltration slips through, or they've stopped investigating DLP alerts altogether because 95% of them are noise. I've seen both, and both are equally dangerous. But the fundamental problem goes even deeper than tooling. It's this. Most banks have no behavioral baseline for their employees. What does normal look like for a loan officer? How many records do they typically access per day? What time do they usually log in? What systems do they normally touch? How much data do they usually download? If you don't know what normal looks like, you can't detect deviation. You can't identify anomalies. You can't distinguish between an employee doing their job and an employee preparing to walk out the door with your customer list. Without a behavioral baseline, your security team is flying blind on insider threats. And that's exactly the state of affairs at the vast majority of mid-market financial institutions today. Let me get specific, because this isn't abstract. These are real patterns that happen at real banks that go undetected for weeks, sometimes months. Pattern 1, the resignation spike. An employee puts in their 2-week notice. Or maybe they haven't yet, but they've already accepted an offer somewhere else. And in those last days or weeks, they start accessing customer records at 10 times their normal volume. They're not doing their job. They're building a database. They're downloading customer contact information, account details, relationship histories, everything they need to take to their next employer. This happens constantly, and it gets missed because nobody is comparing current access volume to historical baseline. The system sees an authorized user accessing data they have permission to access. Everything checks out, unless you're tracking volume trends. Pattern 2, after-hours bulk exports. It's 2 a.m. on a Saturday. Someone is logged into the core banking system and running bulk data exports. Customer records, transaction histories, account details, thousands of rows at a time. During business hours, this might look like normal reporting activity. At 2 a.m. on a Saturday, that's a red flag. But only if you're monitoring access patterns by time of day. Most banks aren't. An authenticated user accessing systems they have permission to access. The tools see nothing wrong. Pattern 3. Privilege escalation bypasses. An employee in a mid-level role suddenly requests admin-level access to a system they've never touched before. Or they get someone in IT to grant them elevated privileges without going through the formal approval chain. Maybe it's a friend in the help desk. Maybe it's a social engineering play. This should trigger an immediate review. But at most banks, privilege escalation requests are handled as IT service tickets. The approval process is a checkbox, not a control. Nobody asks why a customer service rep needs admin access to the loan origination system. Pattern 4, the slow bleed. This is the hardest one to catch and the most sophisticated. Instead of downloading 10,000 records at once, which might trigger a threshold, the insider downloads 200 records a day, every day, for 6 weeks. Each daily download is well below any volume threshold. It looks like normal work activity, but over those 6 weeks, they've extracted 8,400 records. This is deliberate. This is someone who understands how monitoring works, or more accurately, understands that monitoring doesn't work, and calibrates their exfiltration to stay below the radar. The average insider threat goes undetected for 85 days. 85 days. That's according to the Ponemon Institute. Nearly 3 months of unauthorized access or data exfiltration before anyone catches on. And in many cases, the discovery happens not because of monitoring, but because the employee has already left and a customer calls to ask why they are being contacted by a competitor. By that point, the damage is done. Now let's talk about what happens when regulators get involved, because they do get involved. And when insider threat incidents reach their desk, the questions they ask are very specific. The first question is, did you have reasonable monitoring of privileged access? Not perfect monitoring, reasonable monitoring. That's the standard. And reasonable in a regulatory context means you had controls in place to detect unusual access patterns, you were monitoring privileged users at a heightened level, and you had processes to investigate anomalies. If the answer is, we had a firewall and a DLP tool that nobody was watching, that doesn't meet the reasonable standard. The second question is about SAR obligations. Under the Bank Secrecy Act, when a financial institution identifies suspicious activity that may involve a violation of law, and that includes insider activity, they have a SAR filing obligation. If an employee was exfiltrating customer data and the bank detected it, or should have detected it, and no SAR was filed, that's a separate violation on top of the original incident. You now have a data breach problem and a BSA/AML compliance problem. Two findings instead of one. The third question, and this is the one that leads to enforcement actions. The logs existed, why didn't you see it? Because that's the reality in almost every insider threat case. The data was there, the access logs existed, the audit trails were intact, everything needed to detect the threat was sitting in a database somewhere, but nobody was looking at it. Nobody built the queries, nobody set up the alerts, nobody connected the dots. Ignorance is not a defense when the logs existed, and regulators know this. That's why enforcement actions for insider threat failures often include language about failure to maintain adequate internal controls and failure to implement reasonable monitoring. Not because the bank couldn't have caught it, but because the bank should have caught it and didn't. Consent orders, matters requiring attention, civil money penalties, reputational damage that takes years to recover from. All because a bank had the data to detect the threat and didn't have the discipline or the systems to act on it. So here's the question I want you to sit with. Does your bank have behavioral monitoring on privileged access right now? Not perimeter security, not DLP, behavioral monitoring. Do you know what normal looks like for your employees? And would you know if someone deviated from it? If the answer is no, and at most mid-market banks it is, you are one disgruntled employee away from a headline, one resignation away from a data breach, one examiner question away from a finding. I'm building Flux Force because these failures are structural, not about bad people, but about systems that weren't designed to see insider behavior. Aiden Flux handles fraud detection today. Insider risk monitoring is on our roadmap, and I'm looking for risk leaders at mid-market banks who live with this problem daily to help shape what we build. If that's you, there's a link in the description. I'd rather build this with you than for you. And if you found this useful, share it with your CISO, share it with your head of risk, because this is the blind spot that nobody wants to talk about until it's too late. I'll see you in the next one.